One by one, prostitutes die across Central Europe. Austrian authorities believe one man is responsible. But they have no experience hunting serial killers. They turn to an FBI profiler for help. He finds the same killer has come to America, and the death count keeps rising until the FBI stops him.
Beginning in 1990, Europe found itself in the clutches of a serial killer. He became an international outlaw, hopping from country to country to evade capture and to kill again. I'm Jim Kallstrom, former head of the FBI's New York office. Legal cooperation between countries and continents is not common, but neither are serial killers in Europe. Desperate to apprehend him, Austrian authorities called on the FBI for help.
In Austria, the exchange of sex for money has been legal for years. Here, prostitutes walk the streets for men willing to pay for their services. Throughout most of the 1980s, Heidemarie Hammerer worked in the city of Bregenz as a prostitute. A licensed professional for almost 10 years. She was used to unusual requests. But on the night of December 5th, 1990, a customer went too far. The killer hurriedly redressed his victim. Then he dragged her through a secluded forest some 10 miles away and left her body. The crime went undiscovered for 3 weeks. On the morning of New Year's Eve, 1990, a pair of hikers stumbled upon Hammerer's body. Though the body had been left exposed to the elements, the winter temperatures helped preserve the remains. Austrian authorities determined that Hammerer had been strangled with her own pantyhose. Her wrists were bruised from restraints. At the autopsy, they found no sexual discharge on her body. But they did find fibers that were inconsistent with her clothing. She was only the first victim. Over the next several months, 3 more prostitutes died violently throughout Austria. Brunhilde Masser was recovered in a stream bed near Graz. Elfriede Schrempf, also from Graz, was found nearby in the woods. Near Vienna, Sylvia Zagler was discovered in a stand of trees. The women had all been bruised, strangled with their pantyhose, and left in various states of undress, lying face down in wooded areas. The Austrian public was shocked. On April 4th, 1991, the authorities gathered their most experienced investigators to focus on the slayings. Because of the similarities in the 4 cases, investigators reasoned that one person was responsible. Austria had its first serial killer in modern history. They had no experience investigating these offenders. Dr. Ernst Geiger, one of Austria's leading detectives, was assigned to coordinate the hunt.
No lead was promising. All the leads ended nowhere. We had no real suspect.
The first break came when a retired policeman read of the murders in a Salzburg newspaper. They reminded him of a case he solved in 1974. Detective Geiger received a phone call from the retired officer. 15 years earlier, he told Geiger, a young woman had been strangled with one of her undergarments and dumped in the woods. Just like the present victims. The killer was caught and convicted, but had recently been paroled. Detective Geiger took the name of the ex-convict, Johann Jack Unterweger.
Jack Unterweger was paroled after 15 years because he had murdered a young girl before, and while he was in prison, he became a writer, quite a famous writer.
But was it possible that this famous writer could be a serial killer? Geiger and his team began looking into the journalist's background. Until 1990, Jack Unterweger had led a difficult life. He was born to a German prostitute who quickly abandoned him. He suffered neglect and abuse, shuttling between various foster situations. As a teenager, Jack began to play out the rage of his dismal childhood. By age 25, that fury earned Unterweger a life sentence. Unterweger continued his education and started writing while in prison. He published letters, plays, short stories, and an autobiography. In the book that became a bestseller, Unterweger painted a tragic tale of himself as victim. Critics and the public alike embraced the author for the apparent honesty with which he confronted his past. The literary community suggested that art had redeemed him. Eventually, the press and the public at large demanded that his life sentence be commuted. On May 12, 1990, Austrian authorities agreed. The 40-year-old Austrian walked out of prison. He was a free man, determined never to spend another minute of his life behind bars. Shortly after his release, he was hired by a major German magazine to cover the prostitute murders. He promised to use his writing in a socially conscious way. He told his editor that he wanted to give voice to the dispossessed, caught in the underbelly of society, as he once was. By July 1991, after 2 more prostitutes were found strangled, psychologist Tom Mueller of Austria's Criminal Investigation Division joined the team.
When we started the investigation against Jack Unterweger, it was pretty hard because all his friends were within the media and they couldn't understand that he could be the bad guy.
Even among investigators, only a handful considered this celebrity journalist a possible suspect. Through receipts and travel records, Geiger and Mueller learned that Unterweger had been at each murder location. This was not suspicious in itself, since he was covering the story as an investigative journalist. Yet he always reached those destinations before the murders took place. Investigators also discovered that Unterweger had visited Prague in September 1990, just before a Czechoslovakian woman, Blanka Bokova, was strangled with her pantyhose. She was the earliest victim in the string of murders that now totaled 7.
And what was outstanding for us, that exactly at any time where Czech hang out at any place in Prague, in the western part of Austria, in the southern part of Austria, exactly in that time period there was always a dead body somewhere in the woods.
In Austria, another woman, Regina Prem, had been missing for months and presumed dead. Her family waited desperately for news of her fate. In October of 1991, the grief-stricken husband and son received a chilling phone call to their unlisted number.
Hello? Yeah.
The caller
Hello?
told him that he was Regina's killer
Hello?
and described what she was wearing the night she disappeared. The caller claimed that he was the executioner, that God ordered him to do it, that she was left lying on the place of sacrifice with her face turned towards hell. The phone call was cruel torture to an already traumatized family. When police recovered her body, they confirmed Regina Prem was the killer's 8th victim to date. The discovery put them no closer to stopping the killer. Vienna, October 22, 1991. Austrian authorities questioned Unterweger for the first time. With no hard evidence to connect him to the crimes, they hoped for a confession. He admitted to consorting with prostitutes for his writing assignments and for sex. But he denied knowing the victims. Although his alibis were weak, investigators were forced to release him. Their evidence was merely circumstantial, and his public support was growing. But Mueller and Geiger still believed Unterweger was a strong suspect and continued digging into his past. They tracked down the car Jack drove when he was first released from prison. But it had been a year since he sold it, and the likelihood of finding any usable evidence was slim. The team uncovered little, except a hair fragment.
It's good. It's good.
Although it was a long shot, investigators sent the hair fragment to the University of Bern for analysis. Enough of the hair root remained for lab technicians to extract a DNA sequence. That sequence was compared to those of the victims. Of the 8 women slain, the DNA from the hair matched the earliest victim from Prague, Blanka Bokova, killed in September 1990. It was a breakthrough. But that only proved the woman was in the car when Jack owned it. Investigators needed stronger evidence. Now back at police headquarters, Geiger questioned Austrian prostitutes. They recognized Unterweger as a regular customer who insisted they wear handcuffs during sex. More importantly, one recalled seeing him approach her friend, Heide Marie Hammerer, the first victim discovered in Bregenz. She also remembered he wore a brown leather jacket on that night. On the strength of this identification and the hair fragment found in his car, Geiger obtained a warrant to search Unterweger's apartment.
Jack, Unterweger? Polizei!
When the police arrived, Unterweger was nowhere to be found. They took away clothing, including a brown leather jacket for forensic examination. Then one of the detectives discovered some receipts in a trash can. They were from a seafood restaurant in Malibu, California, dated 9 months earlier. Jack Unterweger had been to the United States. But the apartment search yielded less than the investigators had hoped. They found no hard evidence that directly tied Unterweger to the slayings. Since their case was still too weak to issue an arrest warrant, the investigation stalled. Jack Unterweger was still one step ahead. To stop him, Geiger needed help from those more experienced with catching serial killers. He needed the FBI. The Austrian investigators visited the U.S. Embassy. They met with legal attaché Julianne Slisko, an FBI agent stationed in Vienna.
I'm hoping you could help us with the FBI.
Slisko called the Criminal Profiling Unit in Quantico, Virginia.
Hi, Agent McCrary. Serial
She was patched
killer.
through to Special Agent Greg McCrary.
Some killings here in Austria.
Now retired, McCrary spent the last 10 of his 25 years in the FBI, pioneering the science of profiling.
The Austrians contacted the FBI because they were trying to tap into our experience of dealing with serial homicide investigations. This was the first serial murder investigation in modern history in Austria.
McCrary agreed to assist the Austrians. He would help them determine if one perpetrator could have committed all the murders. When Geiger told Slisko that Unterweger had traveled to LA the previous summer, she authorized a telex to be sent to California to inform local authorities. Over the next several days, Geiger and Mueller prepared for their trip to the FBI, packing crime scene reports, autopsy protocols, and photos. Then they received a call from LA detective Fred Miller. Miller had received their telex and said that California had suffered a similar pattern of killings during the prior summer. Now investigators turned their attention to LA, 6,000 miles away, in the hunt for the Austrian serial killer. By the fall of 1991, 8 women had been found dead in Central Europe. The prime suspect was Austrian celebrity writer Jack Unterweger. But little forensic evidence tied him to the crimes. And the public believed the police were pursuing an innocent man. An FBI telex from Vienna to California caught the attention of Los Angeles detective Fred Miller. He and his partner, Jim Harper, had been working for months on a series of unsolved murders. In style and pattern, the LA crimes resembled the ones that Unterweger was suspected of in Austria.
This immediately lit the fires, and it was just unbelievable to go all these 8 months and without the suspect turning up or another murder. This was quite a boost to the investigation.
The American and Austrian investigators compared notes. The cases were clearly similar. The victims were prostitutes. All had been strangled using intimate apparel, and all the bodies were left in remote locations. Now, Miller and Harper began to reconstruct Unterweger's visit to California. They checked the airlines, car rental agencies, and hotel logs. From these, they created a timeline of his movements.
We learned that he came to Los Angeles in June of '91 on vacation, right around June the 2nd or 3rd, and that he left around the 17th of July.
In the summer of 1990, Unterweger visited LAPD headquarters.
I'm a journalist, and I am interested.
He strolled into the public relations office, presented his press credentials, and signed up for the Ride-Along program.
And the Austrian police.
This program allows civilians to tag along with police in their cruisers as they patrol the city.
Tonight at 8:30
As all Jack's credentials were in order, the request was accepted.
It's Jack Unterweger.
Unterweger claimed he was writing a German magazine story, contrasting American and European prostitution. He asked to be shown where the city's prostitutes hung out. The officers introduced him to the seedier areas of Los Angeles. Detective Jim Harper explains.
I mean, if you come to a city as big as Los Angeles, you know, prostitutes don't hang out everywhere. You gotta know where they hang out. What better way to do that than get a ride along with the police department?
Witnesses last saw 21-year-old Shannon Exley in the vicinity of 7th Street and Main Street.
What's that you saying?
She had been working the streets since she'd run away from home at 16. Her life ended on June 20th, 1991. Her nude body was found with her bra wrapped around her neck. Marks on her feet told investigators she had already been strangled when she was dragged some 50 feet to where she was found.
The lacerations across her neck.
Medical technicians were able to isolate DNA sequences from the semen of 7 men. But LA detectives had no suspects with whom they could compare the samples. 10 days later, investigators discovered a second prostitute, Irene Rodriguez. She was found behind a tractor trailer, only 1.5 miles from where Exley's body had been dumped. Both women had been strangled with their bras, and both were last seen in the vicinity of 7th and Main Street. The detectives discovered that Unterweger was living nearby.
We learned that he stayed at the Cecil Hotel, which is located at 643 South Main, which is right on the corner of 7th and Main Street, and that's the location where, close proximity where both our victims were last seen.
A third victim, Sherry Long, was found near Malibu less than 2 weeks later. Once again, Unterweger was staying at a hotel in the vicinity Long was last seen. Around her neck, her bra was tied tightly. Detective Jim Harper remembers the unique method of strangulation.
The way the bras were tied around their neck was nothing that I had seen before. Look, somebody took a lot of intricate time to really take time with the victim and put it around their necks and tie it.
Los Angeles criminalist Lynn Harold compared the knots to see if there was a pattern in the way each had been made and tied.
In order for the knots to be made, the wearing apparel had to be dismantled in some form. It's not like the bras were just taken and tied in a square knot, but they were stripped of the elastic always on the left side. And if 3 people randomly went out and strangled 3 people, it is extremely unlikely that all 3 of them would come up with this same scenario.
Now Geiger and Mueller added the information from the Los Angeles murders to their own case and headed to Virginia. They hoped that the FBI could determine whether one man had indeed killed all 11 women. Back in Austria, Jack Unterweger maintained a high profile.
Guten Abend,
The celebrity journalist continued to publish his articles and appeared on television to talk about the murders. He told audiences that the Austrian police were inept at finding the real killer and had singled him out as a scapegoat. Unterweger claimed that the authorities were determined to send him back to prison, even if that meant framing him for the grisly crimes. Unterweger remained popular with the public at large and in the nightclubs where he was a regular. To his fans, and especially women, he was still charming. He boasted the police had no evidence, only theories. And they would never be able to send him back to prison. In August 1992, Austrian detectives arrived at Quantico, Virginia. They needed an experienced FBI profiler to help them capture the serial killer that had left 11 women dead in Central Europe and California. The Austrians came with 12 boxes of evidence.
Report on that.
Special Agent Greg McCrary refused to look at any information on the prime suspect, Jack Unterweger. He didn't want any preconceived notions to interfere with his analysis. Instead, McCrary wanted to focus on the victims.
I wanted all the case materials on all of the homicides, victimology, a lot about the victims and their background, their history, the method and manner of death, autopsy reports, crime scene photos, everything that was available from an investigative point of view. What we didn't want is suspect information. We just wanted to take an objective look at all of the cases to see what we thought, if they might be related or not, and the type of offender that we thought might be most probably involved in committing these crimes.
Let's get to work.
McCrary did not presuppose that the crimes were linked. He examined the similarities among the cases to see if they were unusual enough to have been committed by one perpetrator. He began to look for a behavioral thumbprint, a criminal signature in each of the murders.
A signature crime analysis is an assessment of the behavioral aspects of the crime, which can in some cases be a single event, but more often it's a constellation of behaviors that are consistent from crime to crime to crime. And this allows us to link crimes together behaviorally based on the behavior of the offender.
Could you push this one back?
Yes.
McCrary looked for patterns. He examined everything known about the 11 women. How similar were their lifestyles? Almost all the women were prostitutes, except for the first woman slain in Prague.
Mr. McCrary, this is a map of Vienna.
A companion last saw Blanka Bokova on September 14, 1990, leaving a bar in Prague, Czechoslovakia. Bokova worked as a sales clerk at a butcher shop, but was known to trade sex for favors. Her body was left on the bank of the Vlatva River in a stretch of woods near Bokova's home. The killer had strangled her with her own nylon stockings. He left her naked, covered with sticks and twigs. He threw her clothes and identification in the river. The first victim Austrian police found had been a registered prostitute for 10 years, Heide Marie Hammerer. In the early part of her career, she had suffered several violent attacks from customers, so she was known to be cautious. Hammerer was last seen outside a parking garage on December 5, 1990. Like the first 5 victims, Hammerer was found in the woods close to water. They all had restraint bruises on their arms and wrists. And autopsies found no semen on any of the European victims. To the profiler, this suggested that the killer struck out of impotence. He was terribly insecure about his masculinity. When he could not perform after being sexually stimulated, the killer lashed out in anger. He strangled the women he blamed for shaming him. Then he left their bodies in humiliating positions. Next, they focused on the LA murder victims. Did they fit the pattern that had been established in Europe? Shannon Exley was found face down in a grassy area near a freeway exit. She was nude except for a t-shirt and a pair of socks. She had been dragged 50 feet from the pavement to the location where she was discovered, after being strangled with her brassiere. Again, this crime, like the others in LA and Europe, showed the killer had preferences and that the violence itself had become erotic to him.
It became clear that there was a pattern to these homicides. That there was sort of a ritualistic behavior that occurred in each of these crime scenes. Each woman was similar in nature, either a prostitute or a woman who traded sex for favors. They were on the street when they were contacted, when they were picked up, usually very surreptitiously. No one really saw these women get into a car. They were transported out to an area, they were murdered, ligature strangled with an article of their own clothing, disposed in a similar manner in an outdoor setting, absence of sexual assault.
All right, roughly from where she was last
After a week, the study of the victimology convinced McCrary that there had indeed been only one killer behind the 11 homicides. The FBI agent and the Austrian detective spent the following week drawing up a profile of the assailant.
Last scene here is that. She ends
The evidence suggested the killer had a good degree of mobility. He was older, intelligent, sophisticated, and an organized offender. To criminal psychologist Tom Mueller, this described Jack Unterweger.
I would say Jack was a very, very good example for a typical type of organized offender, and I would say he was a typical example for a natural psychologist. He was able to understand the needs of other people. He was able to come close to other people, to listen to other people, and then to manipulate them.
But the geography worked against the theory that there was one killer. The murders had occurred in Czechoslovakia, Austria, and Los Angeles. With minor exceptions, most serial killers stay regional and prey within a comfort zone. But enough time had elapsed between the slayings to permit one culprit to move around. Now the profiler compared Unterweger's travels to the chronology of the murders.
And when I overlaid Jack Unterweger's timeline on the timeline of the crimes, they fit perfectly. And that was really a dawning moment, the aha moment, the moment that's really exciting in analysis like this, because now you have a suspect whose movements correlate perfectly with each of the homicides, as well as his prior homicide that he had been convicted for, bearing a lot of similarities to these homicides. We can put him in each place at each time these crimes occurred. And either Jack Unterweger was the unluckiest man in the world to have been there, or he was an excellent suspect.
In Austria, Unterweger continued to enjoy his freedom and notoriety. Some women still found him appealing, even though the former convict was a prime murder suspect. This perplexed Detective Fred Miller.
One of the interesting facets of Jack Unterweger was that he could carry on a normal relationship with a female and still be this cruel and murder other females.
High school student Bianca Mrak was one of those that fell under his charm. The impressionable 18-year-old met Unterweger in a wine bar where she worked as a waitress. She was flattered by the attention from the celebrity writer. He told her he was tiring of all the publicity in Austria and might leave the country, maybe to Switzerland. She agreed to go with him wherever he went. August 1992. Agent Greg McCrary of the FBI worked with Austrian detectives to solve a series of 11 murders. 8 women were killed in Central Europe, 3 more in Los Angeles. All circumstantial evidence pointed to celebrity journalist Jack Unterweger as the culprit. Then they received a phone call from the University of Bern. Austrian lab technicians had completed the fiber analysis of clothing confiscated from Unterweger's apartment weeks before. The inspection had yielded results. Fibers from the lining of the brown leather jacket matched those on the body of Heide Marie Hammerer, the first prostitute found. It was hard forensic evidence that tied Unterweger to one of the victims. But investigators wanted to conclusively link the suspect to all the victims. The FBI had another tool that could do just that, VICAP, the Violent Criminal Apprehension Program. The computer database holds the details of 10,000 solved and unsolved U.S. homicides. A programmer inputted the particulars of the European and Los Angeles cases. Details of the victims, their manner of death, locations where they disappeared, and where they were found were all fed into the computer. McCrary ordered an extensive breakdown, a multi-dimensional search with 15 cross-criteria that could show if the crimes were connected.
I certainly will, Mr. McCrary.
48 hours later, the detectives were called back to the VICAP room to hear the answer. The results were stunning. The computer statistically linked all 11 slayings. Jack Unterweger was the killer. The FBI had given the Austrians solid proof for their case. But Unterweger was still at large. The Austrian detectives immediately returned to Vienna. Armed with the FBI profile, authorities issued an arrest warrant for Johann Jack Unterweger. Again, the police descended upon the writer's residence. But Jack was gone. He had abandoned his flat. Geiger called his office and ordered his team to check all of Austria's ports of exit. Within hours, all train stations and airports were canvassed. But they found no sign of Unterweger. The serial killer was gone. Unterweger had already fled with Bianca Marak beyond the reach of Austrian authorities.
Jack Unterweger is a very good representative of an intelligent psychopath. He became an award-winning author and playwright, but psychopaths are very, very manipulative, and they have a supreme ability to con other people.
Hello? Hello? Ja. Ja, ich bin hier.
On a stop in Paris, Jack called into television shows and protested his innocence. He said his flight was not an admission of guilt, but an attempt to evade a frame-up by the police. He promised to return to Austria and answer all questions if the arrest warrant was withdrawn. Despite his media appearances, the Austrian police had no idea where Unterweger was hiding. In Vienna, investigators interviewed Unterweger's friends. They were unfazed by the fact that he had been indicted for multiple murders. They said that Jack had run off for a holiday in America with Bianca Marak, a former waitress from the wine bar. Bianca was known to live with her mother, so Geiger paid a visit to Mrs. Marak.
Mit wem?
She acknowledged that she had been in contact with the fugitive couple, sending them money via wire transfers. They were in New York and heading down to Florida. Geiger told her to contact him if her daughter called again. Mrs. Marak agreed. Just days later, she got a call from Miami. Her daughter needed more money. Mrs. Marak promptly informed the Austrian police. U.S. Marshals were waiting at the Western Union. The Marshals ID'd the couple as they drove up.
U.S. Marshals, you're under arrest! U.S. Marshals, you're under arrest!
Unterweger was quickly apprehended. He was jailed in Miami to await extradition. Both the nation of Austria and the state of California wanted to prosecute him. LAPD Detective Fred Miller began conferring with his Austrian counterparts.
After Jack's arrest in Miami, we dealt almost on a daily schedule with the Austrian authorities, trying to put the information they had on their murders together with the information on the California murders. The Austrian authorities made trips to Los Angeles. They provided us with whatever materials we needed, photographs of the crime scenes, information on the victims, information on Jack.
The Austrians wanted to prosecute Unterweger in their court for all 11 murders. But they knew that would be difficult. The Austrian public perceived Jack as a celebrity. Detectives would have to convince them that Jack's private evil side was the reality. Special Agent Greg McCrary explains.
What's interesting with Jack, if you look at different pictures from different parts of his life, many times he's nattily attired with a bow tie and has this almost young, innocent-looking face. But then if you see him with his shirt off and you look at these really diabolical, involved prison tattoos that are typical of the more violent psychopathic offenders you have in prison, you see the dichotomy between Jack's outward appearance and the inner psychopathology becomes more apparent.
I've always tried to get
The LAPD detectives obtained a search warrant for tissue samples from the prisoner. In Miami, a technician drew blood, took hair samples and swabs of saliva for DNA testing. The samples were sent back to a Los Angeles lab for analysis. His DNA matched that found in the semen from Shannon Exley. But Exley's body contained semen from 6 other men, and there was no sexual discharge found in the other 2 LA prostitutes. Jack Unterweger worried that he would be transferred to California, where a death penalty was possible. He did not want to die in the gas chamber. But if he went back to Austria, he could be tried for the crimes on both continents. Criminal psychologist Tom Mueller explains.
If an Austrian citizen is committing a crime wherever in the world, the Austrian law is responsible for that guy. So the American authorities gave the clearance to bring Mr. Unterweger here back to Austria.
But Unterweger could delay this by fighting extradition.
You know, Jack.
LA detectives pressured him. They assured Unterweger that he would be found guilty in California and reminded him of the state's death penalty. Fearing the gas chamber, he agreed to deportation.
You'll sign the extradition.
Despite the evidence, he still enjoyed popular support at home. And Unterweger believed he could persuade a jury that the authorities were wrong. But the Austrians were betting on the FBI profile. When Jack Unterweger returned to his native Austria, he faced 11 counts of murder. 7 women were killed on Austrian soil, but the laws of the Central European country allow its citizens to be tried for crimes committed anywhere in the world. The murder indictment had done little to diminish the writer's support in the media. As he sat in jail awaiting trial, Jack continued to lobby the press that the police had framed him. His case saturated the news. In this highly charged environment, Austrian prosecutors prepared for trial. If they wanted to win, they had to present an airtight case. LAPD detective Jim Harper journeyed to Vienna for the trial.
The OJ case here in LA is the only thing I can kind of equate it to. It was that big over there. It was all over the newspapers, headlines. I mean, and when we came into this town to testify, it was a big deal. We were all over the front page of the paper, the whole deal.
The trial was held before a 3-judge tribunal. The prosecution argued their case with minimal physical evidence. They were counting on Agent McCrary's behavioral profile.
Could you say why there's so many different places?
So it became increasingly important to link these crimes together behaviorally. That really was the only way that Jack could be linked to this entire series of crimes. So that became the critical component in the prosecution of Jack, and where we were most able to assist the Austrian authorities.
Take them to a different spot.
McCrary related to the judges what he had deducted at Quantico. The killer always chose prostitutes, or those who traded sex for favors. He was criminally sophisticated, older, at least in his late 30s. He wasn't panicky nor disorganized. He possessed inner rage, but it was very controlled. The victims had bruises on their wrists as if they had been restrained with handcuffs. McCrary was convinced Unterweger would ask the prostitutes to wear them to fulfill his sexual fantasy. But it was about control. The killer wanted their hands secured to prevent them from resisting.
The bodies were found
McCrary's testimony linked the victims together.
to where they were last.
Across 2 continents, the trail of deaths followed Jack Unterweger. Where he went, women died. While he visited Los Angeles, 3 prostitutes were murdered, and their slayings mimicked those in Europe. Shannon Exley and the other 2 American women were strangled to death. The offender used their brassieres as ligatures, and Unterweger tied the knots on the ligatures in exactly the same way as he had on the ones in Europe. McCrary pointed out that the probability was infinitesimal that more than one killer committed the crimes.
What are the chances that more than one offender would be not only choosing to ligature strangle a victim with an article of her own clothing, but he would tie the knots in exactly the same way? Very, very remote chance that we've had different offenders committing the crime in that manner.
But the defense argued there was a difference. The victims in Los Angeles had been strangled with their brassieres, and women in Europe had been strangled with their pantyhose. But McCrary countered that European prostitutes do not wear brassieres. What mattered to the killer was that he used an intimate article of the victim's clothing.
The prostitutes, I'm sure that he was much more hurried.
LA criminalist Lynn Harold was asked to compare the knots from the pantyhose to those from the bras.
In the case of the pantyhose, you had one leg. The second leg was double-backed on itself and used as the third segment for the weaving or braiding, in a manner extremely similar to one of the bra cases where the 2 pieces of elastic formed 2 segments and the left strap was pulled through as the third braid.
In all, the trial lasted 2.5 months. On June 28, 1994, a jury in Graz, Austria, found Johann Jack Unterweger guilty of 9 of the murders. The remaining victims were found too badly decomposed to convict Unterweger beyond a reasonable doubt. The verdict meant life in prison to a man who swore he would never spend another day behind bars. And he never did. Unterweger strangled himself with a nylon cord stripped from his uniform.
We normally think of suicide as coming from depression or someone who feels shame or guilt or remorseful in some way. This is not at all what was going on when Jack committed suicide. More psychopathic offenders like Jack do it to exert control, and it's the last great defiant act that he exercised to wrest control of this situation away from the government, away from the authorities. He would not allow himself to be imprisoned for the rest of his life.
Jack Unterweger proved that serial killers are not just an American phenomenon. European law enforcement agencies realized that to fight criminals of this sort, they would have to follow the FBI's example.
What we learned out of their case was that in Austria and even in Europe, we didn't have a similar system like VICAP. Violent Crime Apprehension Program. The Criminal Psychology Service tried to get a similar system here to Austria, and therefore we can work with all sex crime cases and homicide cases.
Now, thanks to the lead of the FBI, many countries have adopted profiling and a computerized criminal database in the hopes that open borders and conflicting jurisdictions will no longer allow these predators to escape justice. An hour north of New York City, a band of deadly gunmen descended on a peaceful suburban community. They struck quickly and savagely. agents learned that the gang's leader had been living underground for more than 2 decades. The FBI's New York Anti-Terrorist Task Force hoped they could find this most wanted fugitive before he killed again.
A series of armored car heists and bloody shootouts shocked law enforcement. The brutal violence of the crimes suggested a motive more complex than greed. When the robbers started targeting police, the FBI took charge. I'm Jim Kallstrom, former head of the FBI's New York office. Agents would expend thousands of man-hours to stop an armed gang that terrorized New York.
Rockland County, New York, 1981. The burgeoning suburb just 20 miles north of New York City had become a refuge of former city dwellers. Most left their urban homes in pursuit of safer, more affordable neighborhoods for their families. They enjoyed more open space and lower crime rates. The town of Nanuet was typical and drew many people to its new mall. At 3:40, October 20th, 1981, a Brinks armored truck made its regularly scheduled pickup from a retailer. One guard remained in the truck while another watched the doors. The third returned with cash and receipts. With no warning, a gang of masked men burst out of a red van. One guard was hit in the throat, another was hit in the arm. The gunman then trampled weapons on the driver. He shot back, but the assailant's gunfire was overwhelming. One guard managed to climb into the back of the truck for protection.
All right, Charlie, let's go.
Police Chief Alan Colsey of the South Nyack Grandview Police Department was 5 miles away when he received the call. Officers from other nearby towns were also called, since Nanuet was too small to support its own police force.
In October of 1981, when the Brinks case occurred, it was an extremely shocking event for the entire area of Rockland County. For the Nyack community, for the Clarkstown community, this was something that they had never expected to ever see.
Clarkstown police and paramedics arrived first. They placed one guard on life support, hoping he would survive the ride to the hospital. Brinks guard Peter Page would never get that chance. A gunshot had severed major arteries in his right shoulder and neck. He died before help arrived. The uninjured driver said though the gunman had worn masks, he believed they were black males. They sped off in a red van. From a deposit log, police learned that $1.6 million was missing. $1.3 million remained in the truck. Chief Colsey received updates as he raced to the crime scene.
The first information coming in from the Nanuet scene was that the suspects had been seen escaping in a red van. They were eastbound on Route 59. This would take them along a route adjacent to the New York State Thruway, which leads directly into New York City over the Tappan Zee Bridge.
Moments later, a local resident close to the mall reported seeing masked gunmen in a parking lot, transferring sacks and weapons into a small moving truck. The witness told Clarkstown police that the vehicles exited eastbound. Detective Arthur Keenan and 2 other police cruisers were on Route 59, close to the thruway entrance when they received the update.
We proceeded on to Route 59 near the New York State Thruway to see if we would see the getaway vehicle. We went to that area figuring that would be a getaway route.
When the officers arrived at the intersection of Mountain View Road and Interstate 87, they noticed a moving truck waiting to turn left onto the thruway. Keenan ordered 1 patrol unit to block the on-ramp. Then, Detective Keenan received a call about a second moving truck.
At that time, there was a radio transmission from the Orangetown police that they had a U-Haul truck heading southbound on Route 304 near the New Jersey line, which was approximately the same distance from the Nanuet Mall as we were.
Unsure if the truck on Route 59 was the suspects, Sergeant Edward O'Grady and Detective Keenan blocked the truck. Officers Brian Lennon and Waverly Chip Brown approached the drivers.
The suspects were described as being black males. At the intersection, we observed the driver and passenger as being white individuals.
Yeah.
The woman objected to the shotgun. Sergeant O'Grady directed Lennon to return the gun to the patrol car. They believed they had stopped the wrong truck. As Lennon secured the gun, the detective inspected the back of the moving truck. Though it didn't appear locked, the back door wouldn't open. He told the couple that he wanted to see what was inside.
I couldn't understand why it wouldn't open. I wanted to know what was in the back of the truck. And then instantly, as I was said that, a noise came from the truck. I turned and all the suspects were coming out of the back shooting.
The rounds from the officers' 6-shot revolvers bounced off the bulletproof vests worn by the armed gang. Officer Lennon rushed back to his patrol car for his shotgun. Officer Brown was shot in the neck and shoulder and fell to the ground. Even if the officers were wearing their vests, it wouldn't have helped.
We were at a disadvantage. In addition to which, the ammunition that was being used in the M16 was capable of going through vests.
As the masked gunman approached, one executed Officer Brown at point-blank range. Detective Keenan was hit in the leg and ran for cover.
I was still being fired at. Even after I took cover, I had shots go between my legs. The tree that I was behind took a shot chest high.
Officer Lennon had unlocked his shotgun but was taking heavy fire. The gunman rammed the police car, trying to clear it for their escape. It didn't work. Then, 2 cars arrived at the scene. The suspects gathered the money bags and piled into the cars. One suspect never made it to a getaway car. A passing motorist grabbed the woman who had been a passenger in the truck and prevented her escape. He watched the white Oldsmobile and tan Honda speed away. Officers Keenan and Lennon rushed to help their injured colleagues.
As the suspects made their getaway, I went to both Waverly Brown and Eddie O'Grady to see if there was anything I could do for them. Waverly Brown and Eddie were both beyond any medical attention that I could administer.
Still en route, Chief Alan Colsey's main focus now was to find the fleeing vehicles, but reports were scattered and hard to decipher.
It was very, very difficult at this particular time to get a clear, open communication from anyone out in the field back to a desk area because of the number of communications that were literally stepping on one another.
As the chief approached the area, he determined that the crime scene didn't need any more personnel or vehicles. He set out to find those responsible.
I didn't want to interfere with the emergency response in that area. The road was completely blocked. So knowing that this particular escape route would lead them in a particular direction, I made a U-turn at Mountain View and 59 and traced my steps back.
He figured the suspects would travel towards New York City, where there was potential for a greater loss of life. He believed their route would take them along Mountain View Avenue to a T intersection.
I figured there was a 50-50 shot that they were either going to go east or west, and that I could cover at least one of those avenues of escape, and went immediately to that area as quickly as I could. In fact, en route to that particular intersection, I observed the suspect vehicles, two of them, at a high rate of speed heading east on Christian Herald Road.
The chief followed the cars. He radioed in his position and asked for backup.
It was clear to me, based upon the events that had transpired up until that point, that these were extremely dangerous individuals who had no compulsion or no regard for human life and no hesitancy to take the utmost of violent actions against anybody who would stand in their way.
Until units arrived, it would be up to him to stop two vehicles that held 6 heavily armed cop killers. After following for a few minutes, the chief noticed that 2 passengers in the Honda had ducked out of sight, perhaps to load guns.
As we get to the corner of 6th and Broadway, the Oldsmobile makes a right-hand turn onto Broadway going south into the middle of town, and the tan Honda attempts to do the same, but slides, skids across the road.
The chief positioned his car between himself and the fugitives. He drew his gun and continued to call for backup, hoping his voice could be heard over the clamor of simultaneous calls.
I continually order the suspects out of the vehicle. There's a period of a few seconds where nothing in fact happens. And then the door opens up and I see a female put her feet out onto the roadway and remain seated in the front seat of the car.
The chief repeated his commands to exit the vehicle with their hands in the air. The woman then began to reach behind the seat, perhaps for a gun. Then, a second occupant walked towards the officer, wearing a bulletproof vest.
Despite my repeated orders to the contrary, one of the suspects came walking up towards me. The female was attempting to reach around and get something which I immediately assumed to be a weapon.
The chief was outnumbered, and neither of the suspects obeyed his orders. He made one more desperate call for backup.
Driver! Driver!
On October 20th, 1981, the Nyack, New York police chief had stopped one of 2 getaway cars filled with suspects from an armored car robbery that had left 3 dead and 2 wounded. As he continued to call for backup, one suspect reached behind her seat. Another approached the chief wearing a bulletproof vest. He was outnumbered, and neither of the suspects obeyed his orders. As the chief made one last desperate radio call, backup arrived.
What do you got? Got 2, got 1 in the back seat. Get on the ground, face down! On the ground, get on the ground, face down!
They secured the scene and pulled a 3rd suspect from the back seat. Police believed that he had been an armed lookout for the other 2, but was injured and dropped his weapon when their getaway car careened out of control. Police searched the car. In the trunk, they recovered sacks that held in excess of $1 million. Under the front seat, they found a loaded 9mm pistol, the weapon the woman had likely been reaching for. Thousands attended the funeral for the officers slain at the October 20th shootout. The entire community shared the grief felt by Detective Arthur Keenan at the loss of his colleagues.
The death of my two friends, Chipper Brown and Eddie O'Grady, definitely affected my life from that point forward. When you're in a small community like that, in a small police department like that, you go to each other's weddings and christenings and barbecues and things of that nature, and it becomes like a secondary family of sorts, and so it was very devastating to lose two of your good friends.
The four murder suspects, including the woman captured at the roadblock, maintained their silence while arraigned at Nyack Village Hall. Police had no way to know how many more were still at large.
The law enforcement community in Rockland County was taken greatly by surprise by the sequence and magnitude of the events. This was really a small assault team that came to Rockland County to rob this Brinks truck, and it was a magnitude and a seriousness and a firepower that had never been seen anywhere in the law enforcement community here.
If Nyack police were not used to such violence, 30 miles south in New York City, the FBI and New York City police certainly were. The New York Joint Terrorism Task Force had already been investigating a series of armored car heists throughout the region that had been executed in a similar fashion. Now retired Special Agent Lou Vesey was a member of that team. He believed the Nyack robbery was connected to the others.
The people who had done Nyack had to have some involvement with all these other crimes. I mean, because the MO was absolutely identical. The whites were driving the vehicles, the blacks had done the robberies, the weapons that were used were identical to the weapons that had been used in the other robberies we were looking at. So there was no doubt in anybody's mind that this was at least some of the same group.
The suspects were processed at the Rockland County Jail. When asked for their names, all gave aliases, except one. Judy Clark, arrested in the getaway car, was no stranger to the FBI. To agents, she was known as a member of the Weather Underground, a radical group involved in many violent robberies and bombings in the 1960s and 70s. For the Brinks robbery, she would be sentenced to 75 years in prison. Special Agent Lou Vesey was an expert on the Weather Underground.
One female I recognized immediately as Judy Clark, who had been someone who had been under investigation previously by us as a possible terrorist. There was another female there who I thought looked very familiar.
Agent Vesey suspected the woman arrested at the roadblock was Kathy Boudin, another member of the Weather Underground. A fingerprint check confirmed it. Boudin pled guilty and was sentenced to 20 years in prison for acting as a decoy passenger in the moving truck. They discovered one of the men to be David Gilbert, Boudin's common-law husband, who was also a member of the Weather Underground. He received 75 years for his role. Sam Brown, who had been injured in the getaway car, was an associate of the Black Liberation Army, another militant group. Like Gilbert and Clark, Brown was sentenced to 75 years in prison. 4 members of the gang were behind bars. From survivors' statements, agents estimated at least 7 more were out on the streets. Special Agent Ken Maxwell joined the investigation to help determine who and where the remaining fugitives might be. One new lead held promise. The second getaway car had been found a few miles away.
The Oldsmobile was found in Westchester County, dumped or abandoned. Inside, there was a great deal of blood, indicating that whoever had abandoned the vehicle had been wounded during the shootout.
Agents checked local hospitals for gunshot victims. They found no patients whose whereabouts were unaccounted for on the day of the shootout.
Other cases, the bombing cases, even after.
The Oldsmobile was registered to a woman at an apartment on Prospect Street in East Orange, New Jersey. They suspected that the armed fugitives had taken refuge there. Agents obtained a search warrant. They found no one inside and began to process the apartment.
The location in East Orange, New Jersey was a treasure trove of evidence. It's what we commonly refer to as a safe house. Inside that safe house, the New Jersey State Police and the FBI located a tremendous amount of documentary evidence indicating other safe houses, other vehicles used by these subjects, and also photographs and other forms of identification that began to unravel the mystery as to who was involved.
One key name investigators discovered on rent receipts was the legal name of the tenant, Marilyn Jean Buck. The FBI knew her name and history. She was a known operative of the Black Liberation Army and its only white member.
Well, Marilyn Buck had a long history of her involvement with radical politics, if you will. At the time of the robbery, she was a fugitive who had gone underground and was wanted on weapons charges.
What is that?
Agents also found a bomb-making manual, diagrams of 6 police precincts, and a hit list naming civic and business leaders. They turned up more false IDs, disguises, a shotgun, 2 9mm pistols, and ammunition. A ledger with detailed notes made in Marilyn Buck's handwriting revealed the group's illicit activities. It listed dates and expenditures for rental cars, guns, ammunition, and illegal drugs. As investigators sifted through the evidence, they began to encounter a problem that would plague them throughout this complex case, according to Agent Lou Vesey.
I think the real difficulty is just the sheer bulk of information and evidence. Numerous pieces of evidence from numerous crime scenes, individuals who constantly used aliases, false identification, had safe houses. You had to figure out who was who. Was that person identical to a person with a different name but a same physical description in another safe house? It was a gigantic jigsaw puzzle, and sometimes you didn't think you had all the pieces.
Agents still didn't know who was involved, where they were, and why they did it.
Mr. Brown,
to get answers, the FBI needed to develop a cooperating witness. They turned to Sam Brown in Otisville Prison, the gunman arrested after the car chase. He was a low-level associate of the Black Liberation Army. Brown cooperated in the hopes that his sentence would be lightened.
Sam Brown was the only one who decided to talk to the investigators. He really got us started. He's the one that named a few names, and with those few names, that's where the investigation began widening out to the rest of them. So he was very important.
The most valuable name Brown provided was that of the mastermind behind the armed robbery, Mutulu Shakur. Shakur was a known militant, the leader of the Black Liberation Army, and one of the highest-ranking members of the gang who called themselves the Family.
In case you get stopped.
The Family was a group of about a dozen terrorists, comprised primarily of members of the Weather Underground and Black Liberation Army. Their formal association was news to Agent Maxwell.
We had known from prior investigations in the past that these groups had communicated, that they had some common goals and objectives, but never before had that communication or association evolved into this type of criminal activity.
All right, well,
Listen, Sam,
Brown told agents that the family met on many occasions to plan the Nyack robbery. Matulu Shakur assigned jobs to each member of the group.
You know what to do with that? Yes, sir.
Edward Joseph and Donald Weems were assigned as gunmen in the armored car assault. The FBI knew Weems was a member of the Black Panthers and the Black Liberation Army. He had escaped from prison in 1978. Investigators knew little about Joseph. Another man named Chewy Ferguson would handle the M16 assault rifle. Samuel Lee Smith would be armed with a shotgun.
I don't want anybody to fire these weapons until Chewy says. Chewy's a weapon man, all right?
Brown didn't know the names of the others, but provided agents with physical descriptions. Agents put out APBs for the 5 names given, which included Samuel Lee Smith. In Queens, homicide detectives were on their way to Smith's last known address. A license plate registered to him had been found in a safe house. As one detective drove down Smith Street, he passed a driver who fit the suspect's description. The detective called for a marked unit to stop him. When the man saw the lights, he took off. Police followed him into an alley.
Get out of the car! Put your hands out the window! Use your left hand to open the door. Step out of the vehicle. Step out of the car. You step out of the car. Get out of the car. Step out of the car. Keep your hands back.
For the 3rd time in as many days, an armed member of the family had opened fire on uniformed officers. Samuel Lee Smith, the fugitive wanted for his role in the shooting deaths of 2 police officers and an armored car guard, had opened fire on New York City police. His attack did not last long. He was killed by the officers returning fire. Smith was the 5th member of a terrorist group called the Family to have been taken off the streets. 7 others remained at large, with almost $1 million in stolen cash still missing. On a tip from Sam Brown, a gang member already in custody, police canvassed a Bronx neighborhood for another suspect named Donald Weems. Special Agent Ken Maxwell recalls that Brown knew very little about Weems.
Brown had given us a general description of a neighborhood in the Bronx where he had met this individual who fit the description of Weems. My partner and I, after a process of elimination and a lot of legwork, pinpointed a building that possibly could be the place Brown was talking about.
Detectives canvassed the neighborhood, hoping someone would know Weems and reveal his address. They got lucky. A neighbor directed police to his apartment. He told them Weems was upstairs right now. Detectives called for backup. Since every other encounter with these terrorists had resulted in gunfire, they prepared for the worst. In a short time, they entered the building with a warrant and a SWAT team. They had no idea if Weems was alone or if he was armed.
There were some anxious moments in terms of waiting, but then he ultimately came out and surrendered in the hallway. In his apartment, however, we found several firearms, a gas mask, a bulletproof vest, and enough ammunition to do battle with a small army.
Weems was the only member of the family inside. He was tried on federal charges and found guilty of robbery and second-degree murder. He was sentenced to 75 years in prison. Though 6 members of the family were now in custody, group leader Matulu Shakur remained on the streets. Once again, cooperating informant Sam Brown provided agents with a lead. He believed Matulu Shakur could most likely be found in Harlem at the acupuncture clinic Shakur had founded. The FBI and NYPD set up 24-hour surveillance on the clinic.
We utilized agents and detectives of diverse ethnic backgrounds to do our best to blend into certain neighborhoods. We knew from both experience and also recognizing the intelligence and versatility of this group that we had to be particularly discreet in surveilling these individuals.
Agents watched and listened for months. Though Shakur never showed, they noted several others who came and went quite often. Agents hoped they would eventually lead them to Shakur. One night, agents followed a man from the clinic to a house at 85 Barrow Street in Greenwich Village. They learned the house was rented to Edward Joseph, one of the suspects named by informant Sam Brown in the Nyack robbery and shootout. They suspected Shakur was hiding there. They were right. Their months of perseverance had paid off. A federal judge authorized a Title III. This permitted agents to set up wiretaps and bugs. Shakur and Joseph must have suspected the FBI's presence, since they often turned up the TV when they talked. Despite this, agents were able to pick up snippets of incriminating conversations, including a discussion of killing informant Sam Brown. After several weeks, agents had enough evidence for a warrant to raid the Greenwich Village hideout. On the night of March 25, 1982, 6 months since the murders and robbery in Nyack, agents prepared for the assault. They'd strike early the next morning, hoping to catch the fugitives asleep and unaware. As the agents watched and waited, they saw Shakur enter the house. At dawn, 2 SWAT teams arrived. One team entered through the front door. The other covered the fire escape and back. They arrested 2 men, Chewy Ferguson and Edward Joseph, both named as participants in the Nyack heist. Their leader, Matulu Shakur, was nowhere to be found. Somehow, he'd escaped during the night, slipping past the surveillance. Ferguson and Joseph were convicted on federal charges as accessories for harboring a fugitive, though they were acquitted of murder charges stemming from the Nyack shootings. Both were sentenced to 12 years in prison. On July 23, 1982, almost a year after 2 officers and a guard had been killed in the Brinks robbery, Matulu Shakur was placed on the FBI's 10 most wanted list. Finding the leader of the gang responsible for 3 cold-blooded murders would now become a priority for every FBI office across the country. Almost a year after a Brinks robbery and shootout with police, FBI agents around the country continued to pursue the mastermind behind the $1 million heist. Matulu Shakur, a leader of the terrorist group called The Family, had been placed on the FBI's 10 most wanted fugitives list. Shakur and at least 3 others remained at large. In the summer of 1982, an agent from New York City traveled to Georgia to interview a member of the family who had been arrested for a separate bank robbery. Tyrone Risen offered his cooperation in the hopes of a lighter sentence by the state of Georgia. Though he claimed that he was not present when the armored car was robbed in Nyack, New York, he confessed to having helped plan the job that left a Brinks guard and 2 police officers dead. Risen provided crucial information about other members of the family.
Risen was not only a member of the family, he was a very important member of the family and had been involved in all the robberies. He knew who was in the family, he knew the names, and he knew how the family operated. So he was able to describe the MO, the robberies they did, the weapons they used, who did what.
Our lookouts, more or less.
Risen told the agent how members of the group were able to secure so many aliases. The prisoner explained that a manager of a children's clothing store in Manhattan was key to obtaining false IDs. The manager gathered license information each time a customer paid by check. Since New York State did not require a photo license in the early 80s, an imposter would take the information to the Motor Vehicles Department, claiming she'd lost her license. Then, the DMV would issue a duplicate immediately. Risen also described to Special Agent Maxwell the group's motives.
They termed these robberies expropriations, almost acts of war. And as one of their members eloquently, or not so eloquently, commented one time, in war, people get hurt. So if you can understand that philosophy, you can understand the mindset or the motivation behind the gang.
Risen's information helped agents understand more about the inner workings of the group. But by the fall of 1984, 3 years after the Brinks heist and triple murder, 3 fugitives still eluded the FBI, including gang leader Mutulu Shakur, Marilyn Buck, and Susan Rosenberg. Despite this, time was on the side of the FBI. The longer the fugitives ran, the more likely it was they'd make a mistake. On November 29, 1984, local police received a call from a manager at a storage facility in Cherry Hill, New Jersey. He reported a customer on the premises who had been paying her bill with a credit card that was determined to be stolen.
Hello, this is Bob from Cherry Hill Storage.
Officers arrived to find the woman about to leave. Inside the back of the van, they noticed containers that appeared to hold explosives. Police asked her for ID. When she reached for her purse under the driver's seat, the cautious officers stopped her. They wanted her hands to stay in plain sight. Inside her purse, they found a weapon. They placed her under arrest. When she was processed, police learned that she was Susan Rosenberg, a member of the family, wanted in connection with the Brinks robbery and shootout. Investigators secured a search warrant for the van. Inside the crates, they found 640 pounds of explosives and 14 weapons. The van was registered in New York State to a woman named Louise Harmon. Agents discovered the name and her address had been falsified. As forensic technicians processed Rosenberg's vehicle, they noticed a sticker on the door from a repair shop in Connecticut. Agents located the New Haven repair shop where the vehicle had been serviced. They hoped the owner would remember the persons who had brought the van in. They showed the owner several photographs of women who were known associates of the family. The woman he identified was Marilyn Jean Buck, one of 2 remaining fugitives in the Brinks robbery and shootout. While Buck had not used her real name on the vehicle's paperwork, she listed an address in Dobbs Ferry, New York on the repair bill. Agents followed up on the lead. They determined that Buck was in Dobbs Ferry and set up surveillance, but she eluded them for months. Then on May 11, 1985, they finally cornered her outside a diner and arrested her. Buck denied knowing Mutulu Shakur or having any connection to the Brinks robbery and shootout 4 years before.
Have a weapon up against the car.
But a federal trial would prove differently. Buck was sentenced to 50 years in prison without the possibility of parole.
She was extremely important in the planning of the robberies and in the procurement of the weapons, as it turns out. A lot of the weapons that the family had, she obtained in gun shows in Texas, buying them under phony names.
Now, only one known suspect in the Nyack robbery and shootout remained: terrorist leader Mutulu Shakur.
Do you happen to see anybody with him?
Agents searched a Baltimore apartment rented by Buck, hoping for a lead to Shakur's whereabouts. They discovered paraphernalia for making false identity papers, wigs likely used in disguises, plans to bomb federal offices, and $10,000 in cash. Searchers also found guns and ammunition stashed in various locations throughout the apartment.
Looks like another handgun.
Then, scrawled on a piece of paper, agents came across what they'd been hoping for: evidence of Mutulu Shakur's whereabouts. It listed a phone number in Los Angeles. Special Agent David Mitchell spearheaded the search for Shakur. He contacted the FBI Los Angeles field office to have agents follow up the lead.
Special Agent Dana Ingalls in the Los Angeles office advised me that he had interviewed an individual that had established that Shakur had in fact been residing in Los Angeles.
Shakur had eluded authorities in a nationwide manhunt for over 5 years. Agents hoped that this time they could corner him and bring down the leader of the terrorist gang responsible for killing 1 armored car guard and 2 police officers. The FBI and NYPD were closing in on Mutulu Shakur, the elusive criminal believed to have masterminded a deadly Brinks robbery and shootout. Special Agent David Mitchell had tracked Shakur to LA, where the terrorist leader remained 1 step ahead.
There were a number of challenges. Shakur was working with a group of individuals that were closely aligned to each other. They had a support network. The investigators all assigned to this investigation were having a difficult time getting individuals to cooperate.
After many weeks, investigators were finally able to convince an informant to tell what he knew about the fugitive's whereabouts. He said he didn't know where Shakur was hiding, but he identified a man by the name of Chapman, known to be close to Shakur. For about 6 weeks, agents conducted ground and air surveillance on Chapman and other Shakur associates, but Shakur continued to elude authorities.
Shakur was leading a very low-profile life in Los Angeles, at least as far as our investigation could determine. He did not frequent any locations or areas where he could be identified, and we virtually knew very little about his activity at that time.
As the surveillance continued, Mitchell and the other investigators tried to find a pattern to the moves Shakur's associates made to hide him around the city. They pored over apartment rental records and other documents, but learned little. Then on February 11th, 1986, their confidential informant called.
Hey, thanks for the tip.
He told them that Chapman would meet with Shakur that night after Chapman left a Lakers basketball game. Investigators located his car and waited for him to leave the forum. Chapman attempted what agents call dry cleaning, counter-surveillance tactics designed to lose a tail. He wove through the streets, turning and changing direction. Police stayed with him, not knowing if Chapman had seen them. When Chapman reached his destination, Mitchell's team pulled in nearby. Chapman approached a man they believed was Shakur. Two officers headed to where the men were talking, careful not to attract attention. When Shakur saw them, he took off on foot. They caught up with him in an alley. The arrest of this violent revolutionary closed a 5-year nationwide manhunt.
When Shakur was arrested, it was apparent to those officers and agents involved in the arrest that he was tired, and it was late in the evening. He was transported to the Los Angeles FBI office, where Agent Ingles and I attempted to interview him. Shakur declined to furnish any statement to us during this interview and was subsequently removed back to New York City to face the charges.
In the spring of 1986, Shakur was tried on federal charges related to the Brinks robbery and shootout. He was sentenced to 60 years in prison without the possibility of parole. The police officers who survived that terrifying day in Nyack, New York, were relieved that Shakur had been brought to justice. But for South Nyack Police Chief Alan Colsey, the memory of their loss would always be with them.
Eddie O'Grady and Officer Brown, Chip Brown as we called him, we're local Nyack community members. They'd gone through the Nyack school district. They had been on the job before I was, and in fact, more or less had sort of brought me and broken me into the community. They were very, very close to the community and to a lot of us that were police officers here. They were excellent people. They were excellent cops, and we miss them dearly to this day.
To commemorate the slain officers, a monument was erected in Nyack, New York. The surviving colleagues have found some comfort in knowing that the lessons learned from the Nyack shootout have made life safer for citizens, as well as for the officers on the street today.
Let it not be said that they died in vain, but rather that their ultimate sacrifice led to the identification of a national problem. I think their ultimate sacrifice and the tragic deaths of everyone involved certainly uncovered a nationwide network of domestic terrorists heretofore unknown, and in essence prevented the loss of life to others.
Hey, get over here. Get over here. Get in the car.
After an officer was gunned down at point-blank range, a psychotic killer led investigators across the Midwest. No one knew where the gunman would strike next, even as his tally of murders and abductions grew. The FBI and state police raced against time to rescue America's heartland from this deranged gunman.
A small town without any crime was turned inside out by the arrival of one dangerous stranger. Some killers are cold and calculating. Others are impulsive, unpredictable, and hard to pin down. I'm Jim Kallstrom, former head of the FBI's New York office. To flush out this killer required a SWAT team and a profiler who determined he would not surrender without a fight.
At 8 a.m. on Monday morning, September 22nd, 1986, a U.S. parole officer made his way to the home of a parolee in a lower middle-class neighborhood on the outskirts of Indianapolis, Indiana. It was a routine visit scheduled a week earlier. U.S. probation officer Thomas Gall needed to get a urine sample from an ex-convict to check for illicit drugs. "40-year-old Michael Wayne Jackson had been released from federal prison 5 months earlier on weapons charges. He also had a history of substance abuse and severe paranoid schizophrenia. The parolee was reluctant to allow Gall to enter, but the officer insisted. Moments later, a neighbor heard shouting coming from Jackson's house. He saw the officer run out the door. Jackson followed him, firing a sawed-off shotgun into his back. The final shot was at point-blank range. The neighbor called police as he watched to see what Jackson might do next. He told the 911 operator that the ex-convict re-emerged, still carrying the shotgun. But now he was wearing a dark trench coat and heading for his green pickup truck. Indianapolis police raced to the killer's home, hoping to catch him before he got far. The neighbor added that Jackson also had on canvas sneakers and jeans as he watched Jackson leave the neighborhood. Jackson escaped before police could arrive. The police called in the FBI since the probation officer was a federal official. "39-year-old Thomas Gall had been killed instantly from the shot to his head. FBI Special Agent Jack Osborne of the Indianapolis field office was assigned the case.
When I arrived at the Jackson residence, the victim was still at that scene. We had dispatched numerous agents and numerous police were in the area. We were in the process of identifying any witness we had so that they could be spoken to by the police department and also by an agent.
The eyewitness who had called 911 described Jackson's behavior as having become increasingly erratic.
At what time did you see the offense?
The neighbor said he had seen Jackson outside more than once, talking to himself in a loud and agitated manner. Agents called the parole office to learn more about Jackson's background.
While he was in prison the previous year, he had been diagnosed as paranoid schizophrenic with antisocial personality and was to check in through the Indianapolis mental health facility and receive monthly medication for that illness, and they were afraid that he was not taking his medication.
Evidence technicians marked the positions of 3 12-gauge shotgun shells found close to the parole officer's body. Thomas Gall had been shot 3 times, the last one proving fatal. On the job for 11 years, the Vietnam veteran was the first federal parole officer killed in the line of duty. Thomas Gall left a young family and many friends.
I knew Tom pretty well. I knew his family, knew of his wife, knew that he had 2 kids, knew that he had been in the Marine Corps, had spent a year in Vietnam. We had talked about that a little bit. He was an extremely likable person, was extremely knowledgeable and caring, and it was hard working the case and keeping distance because of that closeness.
The inside of Jackson's house was described by officers as unfit for human habitation. Amongst the refuse, searchers discovered the shirt spattered with blood that Jackson wore at the time of the shooting and had since stripped off. Trash and animal droppings were scattered everywhere. There was no electricity or running water. On a counter in the kitchen, investigators found a hacksaw. They also discovered a sawed-off stock and barrel of a shotgun, likely from the murder weapon Jackson was presumably still carrying. As investigators were processing the house, an alert came across the police radio.
All right, we're on our way.
5 miles away, witnesses had reported another homicide. Just 20 minutes after the parole officer was shot, a second man had been killed at a convenience store by a shotgun blast, and a third man had been abducted. Agents interviewed a witness who described the shooter as having bushy hair, a beard, and wearing a dark trench coat. The woman added that the killer was wearing a bizarre disguise.
Witnesses at the JB Market indicate as a subject enters that market, he's carrying a shotgun, but he's got something on his face. The witnesses believe that it's grease and probably some spray paint that is in his hair and his beard, which really was a strange look.
Agents were convinced it was Jackson. The witness described that at 8:20 a.m., the armed man with a silver face burst inside demanding money.
Don't anybody move! You! Get the hell out! You! Get back! You! Get behind there! Get the money out! Get the money! Come on, hurry up over there!
Panicked, the owner struggled to open the register, but the gunman couldn't wait.
Hey, fat boy, get out of here!
Not wanting to leave empty-handed, the killer forced a bread delivery man to drive him from the scene in his bread truck. The witness didn't see which direction the bread truck was headed. Investigators revised the APB for Jackson to include the bread truck. Evidence technicians found a 12-gauge shell casing near the cash register, the same gauge and make as those found at the first murder scene. Buckshot from the victim was later removed to compare to samples removed from the probation officer. Detectives examined the pickup truck Jackson left behind. Inside, they found grease and a can of silver spray paint that was likely the source of Jackson's makeshift disguise.
We find that spray paint can in Jackson's truck. We're not sure why he sprays his face before he goes into the market after he had left his residence. We're surmising that he's trying to hide his identity, and he's doing that in this bizarre manner.
20 minutes later, agents received a call from the bread truck driver. Jackson had released him at the airport, unharmed. But the man told investigators the fugitive was still armed and on the move.
Jackson has taken another vehicle from the airport, again at gunpoint, and he drove up through the Speedway, Indiana area, had failed to pay for $10.50 worth of gas at a Speedway Sunoco station, and he was in a vehicle that is described to us, and there was a female in that vehicle.
Like the bread man, The woman was released shortly afterwards and called 911. But a second woman was not so lucky. At about 9 a.m., a young mother had returned to her suburban Indianapolis home following a shopping trip. As she unpacked her bags in the driveway, Michael Wayne Jackson emerged from a red pickup stolen at the airport.
Hey! Get over here! Get over here! Get in the car! Get in the car! Get!
She was Jackson's third hostage in less than an hour. Jackson held her captive for over 60 minutes, driving with a shotgun in his lap. She begged him to let her go, but he refused.
Shut your face!
There was no reasoning with the crazed fugitive.
She asked him about the disguise on his face, why his face was smeared with grease and oil and had paint on it, and he had no explanation for her, but did tell her that if she didn't comply with what he was telling her to do, that he would kill her.
The woman realized she had few options. When the car slowed, she jumped out. Jackson drove over her ankle, but she managed to roll free before she was injured further. The mother of one was treated at a local hospital for a broken ankle, where she reported the incident. She had escaped her kidnapper in Frankfort, Indiana, 40 miles northwest of Indianapolis. Once again, agents revised their APB. It now included her sedan, last seen traveling north from Frankfurt. Investigators struggled to predict Jackson's next move. They frantically gathered background information, trying to gain an edge.
Mike Jackson had a very extensive criminal background. In 1985 in Indianapolis, he was arrested and charged federally where he had homemade bomb devices in his vehicle and a homemade shotgun. For that, he received 1 year sentence in federal prison, and he was on 3 years parole for that violation during this time.
Jackson had also been in and out of mental institutions much of his life.
With some different looks.
Over the strong objections of his family, psychiatrists had recently released him from a treatment center since his schizophrenia had been stabilized by medication. But without supervision, Jackson had probably stopped taking his prescriptions.
Now, this was not really a picture.
And after 2 killings and 3 abductions in less than 2 hours, no one knew where Jackson was now.
We were in the process of sorting this out, as well as trying to notify all local state emergency people in the state of Indiana, as well as notifying other jurisdictions to help us try to locate Jackson. We knew what vehicle he last possessed in Frankfort, Indiana, and we hoped he was still in that vehicle and was not going to cause anyone else any harm anytime soon.
But authorities would be too late. At 10:15 a.m., Jackson decided he needed to change cars again. He barged into the Frankfort, Indiana home of a mother and child.
Don't move, kid! Get up!
Jackson ordered the woman to get her car keys or he would kill her and her son.
Get your purse! Get up, get up. Give me those keys.
She complied.
Give me those keys. Get, move! Move. Get your kid in the car!
In less than 2 hours, Jackson had kidnapped his 4th and 5th victims.
Go, move!
The killer was becoming bolder and more aggressive. Agents had to somehow find a way to catch him, before his latest victims wound up dead. By 10:30 a.m. on September 22nd, 1986, 40-year-old Michael Wayne Jackson had murdered his parole officer and a grocery store clerk, then carjacked 5 other people, all in less than 2.5 hours. The FBI and Indiana police believed the killer was traveling north from Indianapolis, but his exact whereabouts and destination remained unknown.
Now, hurry up!
Armed with a sawed-off shotgun and his face painted silver, investigators believe Jackson was suffering from a psychotic episode after failing to take his medication.
Let's straight work.
The fugitive was last seen in Frankfort, Indiana, where he had abducted a mother and child from their home.
Get out of the car!
No one knew what he might do next.
Get out of the car! Get over here! Get over here!
Jackson drove his latest victims to a desolate area 8 miles from their home.
Give me that ring!
He stole the woman's wedding rings, then ordered them to the side of the road.
Move it! Move it! Move it! Don't you go anywhere!
Though the woman and her child survived unharmed, it was 20 minutes to the nearest phone before she could report the killer's last known whereabouts. At the FBI office in Indianapolis, 3 hours after Jackson's crime spree had begun, Special Agent Jack Osborne issued a federal murder warrant for the fugitive. But with so little information on his exact location, it would be difficult to prevent Jackson from striking again.
Up northwest of Indianapolis at Frankfort. So that's our last spot. So we now had Jackson leaving or driving away from the Frankfort, Indiana area, but really had no idea where he was headed, how he was going to get there, what route he was going to take, or if he might grab somebody else in the next few hours. So this is our 5th location.
Since Jackson's pattern of travel and crime was so random, agents expanded the search and alerted all FBI field offices in a 750-mile radius, which included Cleveland, Chicago, and St. Louis.
Let all of our offices know if we can get something out statewide, too, to all law enforcement agencies, particularly along Interstate 65 maybe now.
They also contacted the fugitive's mother in Jackson, Mississippi, but she had no idea where her son might be headed.
Frankfort area.
Investigators kept the media informed, too. By noon, Michael Wayne Jackson's photo was on every news program in the Indianapolis area. 6 hours later, the fugitive surfaced close to St. Louis. He had traveled 300 miles southwest to nearby O'Fallon, Missouri. Local officers received reports from 2 residents who had been carjacked by a silver-faced man with a shotgun. A description of their car with Missouri plates was added to the list of stolen vehicles as Jackson's most recent.
It's about a 5-hour drive from Indianapolis to St. Louis. So in the early evening of Monday, the 22nd of September, local and state law enforcement in Missouri, after they had received our APBs, are notifying the police department and our office that they believed Jackson to be in that area because he had attempted a kidnapping and a vehicle theft of a couple different people in that area.
On a rural road later that afternoon, a third O'Fallon resident was on his way home from work when he spotted his wife's car with the suspect at the wheel. The man was unaware that Jackson had killed 2 others that same day.
Hey!
The silver-faced man with bushy hair and a beard refused to stop. As the cars approached an intersection, the killer drew his weapon. At 7 p.m. that evening, the man reported that the shooter only hit the front of his car. He'd returned home after the shooting to discover that his wife and father-in-law had been assaulted by the fugitive, but not seriously injured.
To my wife's car.
Authorities now added the stolen blue sedan and its license plate to the APB for Jackson. It was the 7th vehicle carjacked in less than 12 hours.
We were glad to hear, I think, that we knew where he was. We were glad to hear that he hadn't harmed anyone else, and that we knew now that he had a different vehicle, and that the St. Louis authorities, both federal, local, and state, were in the process of trying to get him located and stopped without getting anyone else hurt.
Yet despite the all-points bulletin, Jackson was nowhere to be found. Missouri State Highway Patrol officers responded to an accident near I-70 in O'Fallon, close to where the fugitive was last seen. A car had careened into a tree. The driver was pronounced dead at the scene. Given the darkness of the night, officers could not determine the extent of the man's injuries. Suspicious of the circumstances, the man's family ordered an autopsy. The medical examiner determined that the man had been shot in the head at close range through the driver's window with a 12-gauge shotgun, the same type of weapon Jackson had used to kill his parole officer and a grocery store owner. Examiners sent the buckshot to the Indiana State Police Lab so it could be compared to the others. It would take several days to learn the results. Area patrols stepped up surveillance in search of the armed fugitive. "10 miles away at around 7:30 p.m., a dark sedan with Texas plates pulled into a Wentzville, Missouri gas station. Jackson had carjacked his 8th vehicle and took its driver hostage. The attendant was unaware of the manhunt and didn't know what to make of the man with the silver face.
$10, please.
When the fugitive paid for the gas, the attendant noticed a shotgun in his lap and blood on his hands.
Thank you.
He immediately notified authorities, who once again changed the APB for Jackson. It now included the sedan with Texas plates. State and local officers rushed to the Wentzville area near Interstate 70. They needed to find the spree killer before he struck again. On September 22, 1986, the FBI continued to hunt for fugitive Michael Wayne Jackson, wanted for murdering 3 and carjacking 11 others in less than 12 hours. The silver-faced Jackson was last spotted at a Missouri gas station, armed with a sawed-off shotgun, driving a stolen dark sedan with Texas plates.
Thank you.
The passenger was the car's owner and was Jackson's latest hostage. It was impossible for authorities to know where Jackson might be headed, since his behavior had been so erratic after he stopped taking his antipsychotic medication. Wright City, Missouri police canvassed the interstate and local roads. At 9:15 p.m., Jackson was spotted alone in the stolen sedan by the town's police chief and a sergeant. Jackson seemed uncertain of what to do next. The chief radioed for reinforcements. They did not arrive in time. The sergeant was struck in the head. Jackson was long gone.
Yes, you all right? Sure?
The sergeant's injury was minor, so the chief gave chase, leaving him with a concerned witness. But the chief never caught up with the fugitive. 5 miles away, A pair of Missouri State Highway Patrol officers sighted the stolen sedan, abandoned on an interstate median. No one was inside, but the keys were still there. Officers then heard banging from within the trunk.
Cover it. Watch out.
They prepared for the worst.
Don't be there. Bill, take it easy. Right there. Hold. Stay still. All right. Take it easy now. Come up.
They found only the terrified owner, traumatized but unhurt.
Turn around.
His identification had been stolen, so police checked to be sure he was unarmed.
My ID.
He described his silver-faced kidnapper, armed with a sawed-off shotgun.
In the trunk.
He had no idea where the man had fled, but it appeared he had taken his gun since police did not find it in the car.
I don't know that.
The FBI and local police fanned out, not knowing which direction the fugitive had run, or if he had already carjacked his next victim. Despite hours of searching, they turned up no sign of the gunman, according to Special Agent in charge of the FBI in St. Louis, Hal Helteroff.
The night that Michael Wayne Jackson had abandoned his vehicle, we had the two sweeps on the south side of the interstate and the north side of the interstate the next morning. We were unable to flush him out of there. Then I determined that this was going to be a longer manhunt than I had expected. And at that point, I ordered in more FBI agents.
State and federal agents examined Jackson's last stolen vehicle. They noted the driver's side door had been pierced during the shootout with police. Since they did not find the slug, it appeared likely that Jackson had been hit in the ribs. The fact that Jackson fled the vehicle moments later could account for the lack of blood on the seat.
One theory was that he was injured and maybe went south of the interstate and laid down somewhere and either couldn't get up due to being injured or died.
A central command post was established in Wright City to coordinate the search efforts.
The vehicle that was taken there was recovered in O'Fallon, Missouri.
The area around the interstate encompassed thousands of acres of farmland and woods. To contain it would require hundreds of personnel, vehicles, and 24-hour roadblocks. For Missouri State Patrol Sergeant Don Bizzelli, no one would be safe until Jackson was found.
Information that we obtained from the Bureau about the background on Jackson made us more concerned for the safety of the citizens in Wright City and for the safety of our officers. He hadn't hesitated to shoot before, and he had already killed a law enforcement officer, the probation officer, and there was nothing that led us to believe that he'd stop.
Great. Have some information you'll need on that.
Authorities established a perimeter around Wright City, extending 5 miles in every direction. Residents in the town of 1200 awoke to find their community saturated with law enforcement, searching for an armed and unstable killer. With a homicide rate of 0 and little criminal activity of any kind, citizens were frightened. They were forced to lock their doors for the first time, and many kept their children home from school.
We had to start alerting the community that we had a suspect in the area that was very dangerous, and asked the people to keep us informed if they saw anybody matching Jackson's description. And it didn't take long for the word to get around, of course, in that small community, because our greatest fear was that he would take someone hostage.
The sprawling countryside was divided into mile-wide sectors. Search teams consisted of bloodhounds, SWAT members, FBI agents, and state police. Photos were distributed to searchers, and samples of Jackson's clothing were provided to the dogs to learn the killer's scent. Hundreds of occupied and abandoned buildings dotted the landscape.
Check out the fields.
All would have to
You
be
got a silo
searched.
back there. You got a broken down building down there. We could be hiding it.
Over the next several days, many locations were explored more than once. It was a tedious and time-consuming process. Bloodhounds, known for their large jowls and long ears which stir minute scents towards their perceptive noses, found few signs of Jackson.
Looks like someone's from camp.
At one building, searchers came across an abandoned campsite. But it appeared the cookware and old raincoat had been left behind by an itinerant laborer during the harvest season. Despite a week of searching, the teams found no evidence of Jackson's whereabouts.
We tried not to get frustrated. We tried to keep the morale up, saying today's the day, we're going to find him. It's the type of case that your troops are out there and they expect any minute that they're going to get a sighting on him, so that in itself just keeps you going.
Media did their part to keep the public informed. While the FBI and State Highway Patrol maintained 24-hour checkpoints on the 27 miles of roadways into and out of the Wright City area, they stopped each car that came through. One of the men they stopped claimed to be the fugitive's nephew. He said he had heard about the search and he wanted to help. He told them his uncle could survive on his own in the woods, and that it was possible that Jackson could be wearing body armor since he owned some.
Okay.
This might explain how Jackson survived a policeman's bullet that had likely hit his ribs.
We determined that from the use of dogs, we had tracking dogs and we had cadaver dogs come in, that we could not come up with a dead body. Therefore, I was leaning toward the fact that he was still alive and well.
Area farmers tried to maintain some semblance of normalcy, though remaining vigilant. A week into the manhunt, one woman spotted the bearded fugitive in his dark trench coat carrying a shotgun. She called police immediately, but the man disappeared before authorities arrived. 7 days after Michael Wayne Jackson had fled his Indiana home, the spree killer was still on the loose. The FBI knew that they had to find him before he found another victim. By September 28, 1986, a week had passed in the hunt for armed fugitive Michael Wayne Jackson, wanted for multiple murders, carjackings, and the wounding of a police officer. The 41-year-old criminal was last seen, armed and on foot, in the rural area of Wright City, Missouri. Despite a massive search, the FBI and local investigators had found no signs of the killer's whereabouts. The FBI considered the possibility that Jackson had stolen another car and somehow escaped the area. Desperate, they turned to FBI senior investigative profiler Ron Walker for help.
What they were simply asking for was my estimate, my prediction, I guess, of what he was going to do, what his continued acts were going to be, and where he was likely to go. And really more importantly for them at this period of time was, is he still in the area that they had been searching for 7 days?
Agent Walker analyzed Jackson's criminal and psychological history, as well as the reports from his current rampage. Since there were no new crimes recorded in the past week, the profiler concluded that Jackson had not yet left Wright City, Missouri.
Well, my opinion was that he was there, that he had probably become disoriented because of his paranoid kind of beliefs, his fear of being captured. He would avoid contact with people unless it would be to gain access to a vehicle to get out. And for that reason, I told him it was very important to maintain a very high profile, a high level of obvious police activity, because you don't want him to have the opportunity to think that he can get a way out by carjacking someone and getting a car and driving out of the area.
Since the fugitive was likely still in the area, the FBI called on the experience of tracker Bob Swabe from the Knoxville, Tennessee FBI field office. Swabe is best known for finding Martin Luther King Jr.'s assassin, James Earl Ray, after Ray's escape from a Tennessee prison in 1976. Agents hoped the renowned tracker could locate Jackson based on the minute signs he was trained to read.
Very seldom will you find a good footprint. You've got to learn to interpret the disturbance that's on the ground, and the little unusual thing like a leaf that is turned over or a stick that is just a small limb that has been stepped on and crushed or broken.
From decades of experience, Swabe can discern the difference between animal and human tracks through the depth of their imprint, the height at which branches or grass are disturbed around them, and their surface temperature. While animals often leave traces of their body heat after resting, humans' body heat is mostly absorbed by their clothing or shoes, preventing their heat from escaping. But since the hunt for Jackson had been so extensive, picking up his trail presented some unique challenges, even for the experienced tracker.
There had been so many people in there prior to us arriving on the scene. I mean, you know, that had I guess probably 200 or 300 police officers, law enforcement officers in this whole area searching before we ever arrived on the scene. So it made it more difficult.
Then, on September 29, 1986, a Wright City resident confirmed what the profiler had suspected. He reported that his guest house had been broken into. Nothing had been stolen, but he did find a broken mirror, used disposable razors, and an open can of soup. From the bathroom sink, evidence technicians recovered shaved hair, flecked with silver paint. It appeared that Jackson had once again changed his appearance. After 9 days of searching, agents feared Jackson may have slipped past patrols with his new appearance. Special Agent Jack Osborne took steps to alert the public at large.
Jackson was added to the FBI's 10 Most Wanted list on October 1st so we could get some national exposure. Manhunt in St. Louis and the Wright City area had continued for numerous days. There were sightings, but we still didn't know for sure where he was, and we thought that added publicity with him being such a dangerous person is what would help get him located if he had left that St. Louis Wright City area.
On October 2nd, investigators returned to a building they had searched a week earlier. Camping gear that searchers had previously noticed was still there, but one item was now missing: a blue raincoat. They wondered if it was Jackson's and whether he had returned to claim it now that the nights were getting colder.
I felt that he was probably going to look for some abandoned outbuilding to hide in, just get out of the weather. You're dealing with a guy here who is who's been on the run, no food or water that we know of to speak of, high strength of emotional and psychological anxiety and arousal. Physically, he would have been very, very debilitated, and mentally as well.
As the team approached a nearby barn they had searched before, a tracker noticed a muddy sneaker print leading inside. Jackson was last seen wearing sneakers. Searchers were not sure how old the print was, or even if it was Jackson's.
We knew that there had been SWAT teams there, and we didn't know really for sure whether that was his track or one of our own tracks. Part of the mud had dried up a little bit, part of it was still wet, indicating that it was probably maybe 8 hours old.
A single gunshot rang out from the hayloft. One team member escaped unharmed, but another was trapped below.
When the shotgun went off above my head, of course there was buckshot flying all over that barn. I don't think any of us got hit by it, but I looked to my left and I saw one of the trackers jump into a stable.
Without knowing the gunman's exact location, he couldn't make his way to the door without exposing himself as a target.
Yeah.
Since the tracker had no radio, searchers spoke to him through the walls.
Okay, good.
He confirmed he had not been hit and described the interior layout so the team could plan a rescue. There was no way out except through the front door.
I saw the outcome in the Jackson case as being a violent one. I saw this going to either a barricade situation with a shootout where he is ultimately killed by the police, possibly a suicide by police where he forces the police to shoot him. I felt completely confident that there would not be a peaceful resolution to this.
The tracker waited for help, trapped inside the barn, with an armed and demented gunman perched above him. On October 2nd, 1986, the FBI and Missouri State Police surrounded a barn in Wright City where a tracker was trapped by a gunman in the hayloft, believed to be murderer Michael Wayne Jackson. As a chopper surveilled the barn from above, SWAT members took positions around the perimeter. A sharpshooter provided cover fire, hoping to distract the gunman long enough for the tracker to escape through the front door. The tactic worked. Although the tracker had been inside for several hours following the single shotgun blast from the loft, he never saw nor heard the shooter after that. FBI Special Agent in charge Hal Helterhoff was left with some tough decisions as he managed the standoff.
We didn't want to send in our troops if he had planned an ambush, if he had just shot as a decoy, if he was still in there alive and well, but still loaded with rounds of shotgun shells. We just didn't know what we had.
The barn's owner provided agents with a detailed sketch of the interior. The farmer explained that there was tractor storage and some stalls on the bottom floor, with a hayloft above. There was a window in the loft, but no other escape routes, no hidden trenches or trap doors through which the suspect might have slipped out.
This is all four here, and I got a whole bunch of hay over here.
Michael Wayne Jackson.
Agents attempted to make contact with the fugitive.
Come out with your hands on your head, and you will not be hurt.
They received no answer.
And after working so hard all those days, we didn't want to make an incorrect move and have one of our agents or officers or troopers injured at the last minute when it was unnecessary. So it was a very, very disciplined, well-organized effort.
The special agent in charge hoped tear gas would flush the shooter out. They fired non-flammable tear gas canisters into the loft. There was still no movement.
It's so dark, and we were trying to determine, should we have our tactical move, our assault? Should we wait till the next morning or wait till dawn where it's daylight? Again, we went 11 days. What's a few more hours when we know whoever's in there is trapped? And we had weather advisement that a violent storm was going to be moving in around midnight. So the state police and I decided, let's go now.
Equipped with night vision goggles, SWAT members navigated the dark, shadowy space. pair of agents provided cover while their partners searched the lower level. They found no one on the first floor. They had no way to know if the killer was lying in wait, or if he was still there at all.
Hey guys, I got a body over here.
They had their answer soon enough. Lying amongst the hay bales, they found a man holding a shotgun who appeared to be Jackson.
Is it him?
He was dead, killed by the single shot he had fired hours earlier into his own head. Agents needed to confirm his identity.
They said, let's take his fingerprints, and we had an FBI agent, expert fingerprint examiner, on the scene with the known prints of Michael Wayne Jackson, and he took his fingerprints, and then we waited while he did his assessment, and finally he announced that it's definitely a match. It's Michael Wayne Jackson, and at that point we were all relieved.
They found no body armor on the killer, but as the FBI profiler had predicted, Michael Wayne Jackson chose to die rather than give himself up. 11 days after Michael Wayne Jackson killed his parole officer and began his crime spree, the town of Wright City, Missouri was able to feel safe again. It could have ended much worse, according to Missouri State Patrol Sergeant Don Bizzelli.
I was relieved for the people that no one else was going to get hurt. That was my main concern. No one else in that community would have to worry about Michael Wayne Jackson anymore.
Through the sacrifice of Thomas Gall, probation officers now have the option of carrying protective sidearms. FBI Special Agent Jack Osborne was close to Gall and his family and continues to mourn the loss.
As a law enforcement officer, I think a little bit of you dies when people close to you suffer. Tom was close to me personally. Tom was a friend. He was not only a friend to me personally, but he was a friend to our office. Our office knew him, and we worked very closely with him in the Federal Probation Parole Office.
For giving up his life in the line of duty, the Indianapolis U.S. Probation Office was renamed in Thomas Gall's memory. It enabled his friends and colleagues to express in a more permanent way Gall's significant contributions, his exemplary character, and the agency's deep and lasting affection for him.